Good evening, everyone. It's Carrie Benedette with Thriving Matters Studio tonight with two sensational educators. Dr. Phil Lambert in the middle there. Hello, Phil. How are you this evening?
Hi, fabulous.
And Simon Hurd. You're very welcome, Simon. Great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you. It's a great privilege to be here.
Oh, look, listeners, wonderful again to have you. We're coming to the close of an education year, and one of the things we've had the opportunity to do this year is really talk about education and how it's been affected by the global pandemic and all the different observations, insights that we have had into how we deliver education, what it is that our kids are learning, what are the skills for the future. And it's not just about Australia and where we're educating, but it's actually a global environment in which we're talking about. So it is my great pleasure tonight to have a conversation around global competencies for the future and these living learning communities that are really energised for our young people and their future. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Phil Lambert. Oh, Phil, you must get Dr. Phil quite a lot, do you?
I've got a photo with him too, so I'll show you that one day.
Oh, thank you so much. Phil, for many of you in education, Phil has an esteemed career and has been involved in nearly every leadership position, from teacher through to principal to Assistant General Director and Regional Director in Sydney, General Manager for the Australian curriculum, which he developed many years ago. I met Phil on the New South Wales Board of Studies before it became NESA, and we had some very interesting conversations in the Primary Education Committee meetings. Phil has a master's and a doctorate. He's an adjunct professor. He's a fellow of the Australian College of Educators, and he has received a number of honours and awards. The Public Service Medal for his outstanding contribution to education. He's been a recipient of the Harold Wyndham Medal for the Australian College of Educators, and recently received the New South Wales Teachers Guild Phyllis Evans Medal. Now, Phil, currently working globally, and it is amazing where you have been travelling, Phil, from Japan through to Lithuania, the Netherlands, Qatar, Kazakhstan, United Arab Emirates, UNESCO. Oh my heavens, it is just pretty amazing. What great opportunity you've had.
Don't forget to Phil.
I think my favourite there is Port Stephens.
Oh, yes. and with Phil Hurd in Port Stephens. You're very welcome, Phil, and we're going to tap into some of your great insights from the work that you've been doing currently in reviewing and reforming curriculum in the UK as well. So you're very welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Simon is currently the principal at Madawi Christian School in the beautiful Port Stephens, as we've indicated. Simon is very well known. His reputation precedes him as an innovative educational leader. He has a number of qualifications and academic qualifications at that, educational leadership and management, his Masters of Educational Studies, Business Administration, and he's currently doing a PhD as well. You make me feel tired, you two. You received a Young Citizen of the Year award from the Australian Government. You have received many prestigious alumni awards from your undergraduate university as well. One of the things that Simon has is a very strong sense of service, and his relationship with the sister school in Vanuatu after the cyclone, I think it was Cyclone Helen? Pam, that's right. Cyclone Pam is still within the realms of the experiences that he gives his students at his current school. Now, I haven't done you both justice, so let the conversation do the rest of the justice for us tonight. So, thanks for letting me read some of that, because I couldn't put it all to memory. All right, let's see how we're going. Now, one of the questions really is that, are we using our children and our students in our schools as experiments? Because there's a lot of reforms going on. There's a lot of observations and insights. And as we know, we all have a view on education from how we were educated. But tonight, what we'd like to do is talk about these global competencies, or do we call them something else? And where is this being driven from? So over to you, Phil. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've been involved in the last decade or so around reforms and reviews?
Thank you. Yeah. So the terms are used fairly extensively, competencies or capabilities, soft skills. Some people refer to these as well. But what we're talking about essentially are the kind of capabilities, skills, knowledge, dispositions that you need to be able to, as your program states, thrive, not only in life, but also in work, and understanding well-being is all part of being part of society, and that means contributing in any kind of work that you might do, whether it's paid work or volunteer work, and so on. It's not a fad, the competencies that we're talking about here. Fads are things that effectively, one place borrows from another, and it has a short lifespan. What we're talking about here are the kinds of things that schooling systems, governments talk about what they want their young people to have. And when I work with the various countries I do, and with the OECD, UNESCO, and so on, this is a whole lot of countries coming together and effectively saying, we want our young people to be well equipped for the future that we've created for them. At the OECD, we often refer to that as the VUCA world. It's volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. We've created that for our young people, and clearly this year is if you wanted an example, it's come in spades this year. And how well have our young people dealt with the situation? How well have our adults? How well have we, when you think of the US election, how well are people applying critical thinking to information they're given? How well have we been able to create new value out of a difficult situation? How well have we been resilient? How well have we been responsible and respected, when we've been given information? Literacy and literacy, they're essentials. They always will be. Every country continues to see these as foundational, but there are many other competencies now. We once talked about them only. Now what countries want to do is make sure they're embedded in teaching and learning.
That's right. And all those go together for well-being. If we don't have really good well-being strategies in place and frameworks, there will be no learning.
That's right. Well-being is the umbrella. It is. Whether we're talking about individual well-being, social well-being, economic well-being, well-being is the umbrella, and how you get that is by equipping young people with these competencies.
I think the exciting thing out of that conversation around these global competencies that we like to term as fluencies at our school, but for me, historically in education, we've had these anchors that have held us to the past. And one of the things that we've all experienced this year is the challenge to be continually looking forward. So for me, with our staff, for the last few years, we've been on this, what does learning look like moving forward? We've all talked around 21st century learning, and so often that's still bandied around, and we're in 2020 moving to 21, where the global competencies, for me, they are forward focused in the nature and the dispositions and the skills that are required to be successful in a future-focused economy. And for me, that's been one of the really significant things that, as Phil shared there, that they're not these whim moments that sometimes we see in education that come full circle and we find that there were other things and we go back on the roundabout. But this is really well established from lots of research, from global investment. So it's not just even Australian in that context. It comes from a global perspective of what do our young people need into the future to be successful.
Yep.
Now, I've just heard some new language that some of our listeners may not have heard, because really all our programs have been around awareness raising of what is actually happening and what can happen, what's gone ahead without us knowing. So, Simon, tell me about this word, fluencies, the language that you're using. I think it's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So as Phil touched on there before, that the OECD have identified global competencies, and with our leadership team, we really dived into this early and have had some great sessions where we've really explored what does it mean to be competent. And I guess the best way that we can align our thinking strategically in an education setting is you think of swimming. That when you've got young people that are competent swimmers, they might be able to do a stroke that gets them to the end of the pool and you tick a box to say, yes, they're competent. However, for us, we don't want our young people to just be competent learners, that they're just that 50% mark. We want them to thrive into their learning and to see themselves as lifelong learners. And so we came up with this notion of being fluent in what you do. And that perspective in the swimming, when you're a fluent swimmer, it allows you to explore new horizons. You can take up water polo, you can go sailing, and you actually can create new things with that competent skill that you have. So the notion of being a competent learner or a fluent learner for us was significant in the vocabulary, because it really determined that we want to achieve a sense of excellence in lifelong learning that allows our young people to create something new and different as a result of the skills.
Yeah.
And over time, your leadership team and your teachers are using this language. So that must then trickle down into how the students talk about their learning as well.
It's certainly a new space. We've really started using that fluency terminology this year, and we're seeing that it is engaging into that conversation and seeing how things are being planned for learning for our students, and looking at the way electives are run in our secondary part of the school, and service learning opportunities around applying learning in new ways so that the kids have student agency in that space. That's one of the global fluencies that we have really valued, that it's an engagement tool and it's that co-creation with the learners, which ultimately provides a sense of lifelong learning, or you're instilling that love that learning is not something that happens to you, it's something that happens with you.
I was just about to say, you've worked with Phil, and every now and then we have a little IT issue and he'll come back in, so don't worry about that. We go with it. But you've worked together. There he is. You just wanted to be on the end, Phil, didn't you?
Like the Brady Bunch.
I thought I got rejected. That's what must have happened. Story of my life.
No, I think we're just showing how well we're adaptable to changes in the environment as we do this. But you've been working together, haven't you, over a period of time? So tell us a little bit about the change that you've seen in your staff, in the way they now can define learning for their students, and what you're seeing in your students.
I think the first word of significance is the word change. That this concept is a new paradigm in learning. And when we launched it with the staff, we resonated the journey of climbing Mount Everest, or climbing something new that was beyond our initial competence of horizon. What does it look like? Well, we might not know the direct path. We might find some different things along the way. So we'd been on that journey of what should learning look like. And then COVID came along, which was a really significant detour. But out of that, for us, there's been a really significant focus, as everyone, around that notion of well-being, around the notion of how we engage in an online world when that's where everything is happening. But for us, we also explored the opportunity to get approval to continue in this online space. So we saw an opportunity to establish a distance ed school, and we've called that borderless learning, which really fits so well to that notion. And so through the middle of COVID, we launched into borderless learning with our staff, who then started to experience how that can play out into our classrooms. The notion of hybrid learning has been really significant. We've been looking at some research out of the US, how that can really benefit learning for physical classrooms as well. And we've seen that throughout this year. We've started to embrace these competencies or fluencies and really started to be forward focused, looking at the front windscreen at a new horizon of learning, rather than often the history of us being held to the way we were taught, the experiences we had as students and as parents in those communities, and ultimately being chained to those rear view mirrors. And I guess for me, that the notion of being able to take them on that journey of, first of all, we talk about growth mindset in our classrooms, but first in this journey, we have to experience that and we have to lead ourselves through that, so that we therefore have the right to lead others through that journey as well. So that has really seen our classrooms start to change. So we've seen practices continue in primary with hybrid learning, so literacy, with some of those explicit teaching moments that are really explicit, really defined. Having those recorded allows for immense differentiation immediately. And we've continued to use that as we've moved through lockdown phases here in our community. And we've seen continuing growth in student learning that's been beyond what we would have imagined. Having that ability to differentiate, to have the explicit instruction without the distractions. So that's been something of a significant journey in a practical way for us this year.
Well, Phil, is this something you have been working with and seeing in other countries around the world, or is this is a real response, the hybrid learning that Simon's talking about that's happened this year? Is that a response to his forward thinking and that of the needs of the community here?
Well, let me put it in context. There's across the globe, through various UNESCO, UNICEF, and OECD and other platforms been engaged with. I've got a fairly good picture about what's happened across the globe in this period. And whereas we can obviously reflect on how challenging it's been here, it's been incredibly challenging elsewhere. The Northern Hemisphere, their school year ends at the middle of our year in June. That's when their exams were. So you get countries like Scandinavia that didn't run their normal, if you like, high school certificate, their end of year, and had to rely on other strategies, and are now, for the future, looking to not run those external exams again. So great learning from them. So it depends if you've got the basis to start with. What Simon, in Simon's school, he's coming from a very strong basis. He's got great leadership there from himself and his team. There's very strong values that the school is based on, and they live it and breathe it, and it's very identifiable. They were already innovative in terms of their using technology. This wasn't a crisis response like we've seen in some other schools, in some other systems, in some other countries. In South Africa, they've had to set up WhatsApp for students to be taught. That's how they're being taught. And that's, in Costa Rica, the main interest there has been getting food to families, not education. So it's all relative. And it's very clear within Australia, schools like Simon's that actually were looking at blended learning. We're looking at flipped classrooms where, the students are given kind of tasks at school and they go off and do them outside of school. They were able to really move into this very well. And when people talk about a new normal, some were coming to that anyway. That was the normal they were working towards.
Yeah.
They were recognising, at the point you make about AI, that you need a whole lot of competencies. You need to actually know when it's best to use technology and when not to.
Yeah.
When the social capacity building that schools provide, the face-to-face elements. And I know Simon's building that into his distance program as well. That is a blend. That's a different kind of blend that they're working with there.
Yeah.
I wasn't surprised to see the way Simon went. And the other thing I thought I should mention, sorry, I'm taking this off the question a little bit, but I thought before too long I needed to say, no country that I know, and in Simon's schools, another good example, no one's talking about jettisoning knowledge or disciplinary strength. We recognise the value of the disciplines.
Great, that's a good point to make.
What we're talking about is at an atmospheric level, kind of lifting the importance of these essential skills, these fluencies, as Simon School has been calling them, because, as he said, it's actually how you apply these in various contexts in life, and the more that you apply them in different contexts, the better, the more fluent you become. These aren't you can't learn problem solving in visual arts, and that means you're a good mathematics problem solver. You need to actually experience problem solving in all the different content contexts. But what we're talking about is less focus on, death by 1,000 dot points of traditional content, and more about what are we trying to achieve here? What are we saying we're trying to achieve? What are the kind of young people, what do we want to equip our young people with? And let's make sure we're doing that. And the other key thing here, Carrie, that's been missing in the past and now everyone is turning its attention to is how do we assess these? How do we actually assess?
Big question.
And are the kinds of exams that we've kind of relied on, they're helpful in us identifying and assessing some aspects of learning, but not all the kinds of things that we know young people need.
Well, I think you've nailed it, Phil, really, because assessment is a massive challenge for people. It is a massive consideration. And when you both were talking there, I just thought, right, I'm really interested in how your parent community has seen your innovations and your changes that you've put in place, Simon, because those parents are also in Port Stephens. Those parents would also be employers, right?
Yes.
Of possible students. They would have businesses. They have other interests as well. So I'd be interested in what the community response was to your distance, your hybrid learning style.
Yeah. So our community is quite unique in some aspects. So we have a large tourism population and economy in that space. Yet, flip to that, we're very close to Williamtown RAF base and Newcastle Airport. So we've got a high defence industry there and a lot of associated industries that are into your maintenance of aircraft, technology systems that go into those spaces there. So there's a real interesting challenge in the skills that are required in both of those. But for me, one of the aspects that's been significant is these skills or competencies that we've termed fluencies. For me, the strength of them as part of a learning continuum in a school is that they're transdisciplinary. So that you're teaching entrepreneurship not in isolation as a subject, but it's how that thinking, that applying new things, the creative thinking that Phil touched on, the student agency. You can have the foundation skills that teach students the discipline, but if the students aren't engaged in that space, how much knowledge are they actually taking in that then allows them to go deeper and explore new creative learning? So the journey there is really different groups take different things. But we've really narrowed our focus on a few of these key competencies to drive hard into, and some of those being student agency is one for us. Entrepreneurship has been another significant one for us, that we see that incorporates a number of those different skills, thinking, and another significant space is in that financial fluency as well.
Yeah.
You look at the impact that COVID's had and tying the entrepreneurial skills, but the ability to actually take the information that we've learnt in maths and English and different components, and how we can actually use that to free ourselves up to use that as a financial fluency, rather than just being competent at paying bills and using an FPOS card. It gives us an opportunity to be across all those domains that we currently have in disciplines of school, to take our learners beyond that and give them skills that they will be able to apply and set up businesses. And we've seen that this year through COVID. Some of our students in primary and secondary have established businesses and been proactive into that space as well, which is really exciting as an educator.
Well, I was going to ask you about what applications are you seeing? What are you finding out that they're up to? Because innovation and creativity is often squashed when our little people get into kindy. They've had such an imaginary life beforehand, creative life, and sometimes you just watch it start to diminish. So I'm really interested. I was going to ask you about it. Basically, they're into action research, aren't they? They're applying it and they're living it, and they're failing. They're trying again. They're readjusting. So it's quite exciting. I think it would be quite life-giving for you as educators to see what's happening.
Definitely, and a role. So the work that Phil has done with our staff in that journey is encouraging them to see themselves as a guide alongside the students, or the coach of the student conversation. With our Stage 3 students, one of the learnings that they put in play was a transdisciplinary unit. There's a new fast food chain coming into our local community, and so we wanted our students to actually put some real world context to this and explore the research, the whys, the developments around that. But ultimately, COVID stopped what the final product of that looked like, but ultimately we were giving the students the opportunity to connect with our local politicians as the assessment tool, rather than you can test and show the knowledge, but the application of that to having a real life audience that is highly respected in our community really lifts the game. And that notion of student agency, the notion of them as a learner having ownership over an output, a deliverable, but also the teacher coaching and mentoring, facilitating, rather than just pouring the knowledge in. There's the teachable moments in that. It's not just throw them and let them go to their own devices, but helping them structure survey questions. That, again, for me, really the competencies that come into that entrepreneurship, the critical thinking, the problem solving in those skills that create something deeper and richer than what our traditional schooling have.
Carrie, I think it's important to add here what the key to this too was Simon's staff. They didn't throw out the syllabuses, the authorised required syllabuses. They used the outcomes. They look for what the outcome, what we were trying to achieve in these various subject areas, and were able to contextualise this was an issue, a real issue, and to realise and actually show the power of deep learning using what they're required to do, but doing it in a way they're not straitjacketed by a succession of dot points.
And I think one of the challenges there too is that paradigm shift for staff. It's not easy, and you've got to be willing to take the time to get it right. So you've got to allow the staff time to test it, try it, experience it. So our first test of it was small and low, rather than lofty, here's the whole term, everything fully integrated assessment.
Okay.
So it's very much around, let's have a taste of success and then let's branch it forward from there.
Yeah.
You're talking about optimizing the outcomes, aren't you?
Yeah.
Of the situation, of the learning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I am fascinated. I think a lot of parents would love to hear about this style of educating for the future.
Right.
And if we look at Phil, and you know this better than me, if we look at the OECD, World Economic Forum, all the papers, so we're moving towards 2030 goals and outcomes for education for the whole of the world community. This is shining a great light on how to do things differently to increase the optimal learning of the students and your teachers, because they're still learners as well.
Right.
Absolutely. So when I finished my work with the at the national level here with the Australian curriculum, the OECD engaged me to be a curriculum expert for them on the OECD 2030 Education 2030 project. It's very exciting. What it effectively is saying, again, what are these competencies that young people need, and how can we equip them, and what are the barriers, what are the things? There's 36 countries involved in that. It's not, Australia's one of the countries involved, and effectively what the task has been is all of them say the curriculum is crowded. So how do we reduce the curriculum and get deeper learning? And that really means we actually have to call into question all that we include in curricula, and things that have been taught continue to be taught, even though they're no longer relevant, or their relevance is less important than some other things that are new and emerging. And so this is what every country that I work with is trying to do. It's trying to review and say, well, what can we now really jettison, knowing that teachers only have so much time, students only have so much time to learn. What are the key things we want them to really grasp, and as Simon says, to be fluent in, and let's make room and space for that to happen. I can tell you, by the way, an interesting example here. Most people would think Japan. When I say Japan, they would think, really heavily reliant on studying towards exams and so on. That is the case. But as of next year, students that leave the secondary system there and want to get into the public universities, which are the most sought after there, their schools, the exam will only play a certain percentage in their in the material that goes and has them selected. So there's a whole profile of these competencies that have to be provided by the school about what the students have demonstrated. Many things that you can't get from exams, but they're from actually, as Simon's doing, seeing students in practice.
Well, I was going to ask Simon and you about that, because assessment is really major. And we've had a discussion here about the high school certificate, about when year 10 moderated exams finished, a lot of things. This year will be very different for our HSC students, and how they're going on to university if that's their choice. So that is a big not a worry, I don't think, but it's an issue, and it's gets a lot of conversation around the barbecue, around the what are you going to do? Here are your choices. How are we going to get you in? How are you going to get into this or this or this? So, what are some of your thoughts on assessment? So you've told us a bit about Japan. What do you think will Australia make their own mind up? Will we follow? Will we use other countries, for example? So I'm in your hands for this one.
Well, the interesting thing about Australia, we're a federation just like the USA and Canada. And so we have, although we've got a national curriculum and from kindergarten through to year 10, the states embed that into their own version of that. When it comes to the senior years, they hold very dearly to their exit exams. So you have variation across the country. And, you have states like South Australia and Victoria that require like a research project as a contributing element of the final assessment. Or South Australia, which, 70% of the students' assessment is by their work in the classroom, 30% only from the examination. So you are having increasingly, and South Australia is doing some really interesting work at the moment around learner profiles and so on. So I think that, plus increasingly as universities are accepting students with a different kind, the ATAR less valuable compared to other qualities that you can demonstrate that you bring. I think we'll see, the tipping points well and truly on its way. I think we're over it. When countries like Japan, when you get, as I said, Sweden deciding not to run with its, are likely not to run with its exit exam in the future, when they've proven that they can do without, if they rely on teacher judgment, if they equip their teachers to be able to make those judgments, what we end up with is a much richer description. I mean, we're one of the few countries in the world where, in fact, I'm not sure of any other country where all your 13 years of schooling, if you go on to year 12, ends up with one mark, like one score.
And that's an interesting space too, Phil, that this year the challenges that universities have had about ATAR and different states and the disruption to their studies. It's been interesting seeing the universities start to raise that challenging question of what does that actually tell us about learners coming into our courses. And we've had conversations directly with 2 institutions at that tertiary level that are keen to explore a future horizon where student portfolios and demonstration of their understanding and the opportunity for them to demonstrate their critical thinking are deemed highly valuable. I think it's a horizon that is certainly in hot conversation now. It's the how to bridge that gap from the score on a page to something that other countries are doing quite well in that space and seeing high engagement from their students rather than high dropouts that we're often seeing in that tertiary change as well.
Yep.
So I'm just going to move that on a little bit, because the challenge then, if we're looking, say it's a portfolio that is now presented. Bill, you talked to me a little bit before about the fusion skills that are very popular. So if I said to you now, what do you think those portfolios might have as their framework? What would be included in those global fluencies that we've been talking about? What would we put in there?
Yeah, so what I mentioned before about the UK, that was the City of London invited me to be part of their work on fusion, it's called the Fusion Cities. They had their second meeting. It was first meeting last year, second meeting this year. There'll be another meeting next year. And they've identified 12 competencies that they feel as the city, and they've asked other cities from Europe and the UK to participate in this. What are the competencies that, regardless of what work you're in, how can we make, what are the fusion, how do these all connect to make an outstanding person, both in terms of their work and their contribution to society? And these are one of the practice that's happening in different places is the badging, where you demonstrate. You might do a Google course, or you might do a Yahoo course or something like that, and demonstrate you have particular competencies. And so you're accumulating a whole lot of micro credentials, demonstrating, that you can do this, you can do that. And that has seen I've got to say, the idea, that if you're seeking employment and you've got a certificate, a bachelor's or a master's in some highly technical skill, it's kind of like these days, yes, that's fine. That gets you into the mix. Now we want to see these other things,
The
So,
application.
yeah, you've got the subject knowledge, if you like. What do you like as a person? How do you work with others? How are you going to add value to our organisation? These are the kinds of things that universities know that the workforce demands, countries want, businesses want. They want people with these whole mix of skills. So you can acquire those through micro-credentialing. Schools can develop these profiles themselves. There are so many tools now that enable you to do that. And so the idea of everything coming up to a final big set of exams and then you go to mark at the end, we're kind of comfortable with that because that's what we know. And, New South Wales, other states have been able to make it happen under this crisis. Other countries didn't have that luxury of time to kind of enable that and have their kids back at schools and so on. So they've found other ways. And
Phil, I think
the
concept that you touched on there of the micro-credentialing, I think is a massive thing moving forward where fit in the conversation now. The traditional approach to stage 5 electives of doing some of the stuff that you go, what's the application of that? We're exploring micro-credentialing into those courses so that the students are actually getting a real-world skill that has some value that might culminate in something very different to what we would typically badge them with on their rosa of having completed XYZ course. This actually opens up pathways for employment whilst they continue in their schooling, having real-world success in a moment rather than, okay, how do I get to this point into the future? But in a moment, having some success along that journey that keeps them motivated to continue striving.
Yeah. Think of the
exciting.
context that Simon mentioned there, the ecosystem around his school there with the airport tourism and any of the other work and life that the communities in, drawing those in to the school and being able to give kind of credentialing and recognition for things the students do in co-agency with some of these organisations and individuals. It's just rich if we use it.
Well, to me, it all comes together and there's a whole community that is thinking not just about themselves, but others as well. So it brings it all together and I'm really excited. I'm so thrilled that we've had an opportunity tonight to actually talk about what it is that's been happening here locally that mirrors what's happening in the rest of the world. And it's been we've got the engine running and we've got the fertilizer starting, the seeds are being planted. I'll use a bit of a metaphor, is that all right? The seeds have been planted, those, and it's just starting. The seedlings are coming up. We've got all these different branches. We've got forest gardens, you name it. We've got some amazing things happening, and that's what education is all about for me. And I'm a little bit older now with some generational responsibility. So it's all about that. Our time has just flown, so I've got to say thank you to you both. But I know that some of our listeners, if they wanted to contact you and continue this or find out a little bit more about what you do, they're curious. Simon, are you happy for them to pop on and have input?
Very happy to share, to bounce things, to explore conversations together. So, very happy to pass on contact details and share that wide and far.
So Madawi Christian School at Port Stephens, pop onto their website and have a look. There is a contact part of the website. I know that for a fact. And Phil, you,
Phil Lambert,
easy to find.
Phil Lambert Consulting, and on Facebook, on as Phil Lambert and LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn's another great tool to connect into that space as well.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Oh, look, I've thoroughly enjoyed your company this evening, your brain power, the whole Brains Trust, but your absolute passion for looking and being curious and being able to put creations into innovation. So I think that's really important, and that's what we want when we talk about leadership and we talk about education. That's the crunch, isn't it? The connection that we have to build something that is greater than ourselves.
Brilliant.
So your thriving matters. Our children, our future generations' thriving matters, and we will be able, as another well-known coach, international coach says, we will get through this because we are so much better together. So thank you so much for your time tonight. Absolute pleasure. And listeners, next Tuesday, we're coming to the close of our education year, and we have two more sessions, episodes left of Thriving Matters Studio. So I look forward to your company next Tuesday night as well. And our final session for this year will be Tuesday, the 1st of December, and it's going to be celebration time. So we're going to have a lot of people popping in and out that you've been able to talk to this year. So I look forward to that one as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
Take good care of your very good selves. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.